I'm going to shine a light on all of the problems here in New Mexico. And I really hope that the Attorney General enjoyed his job while he had it.
Welcome back to Missing. I am Tim here today with Lance. Lance, how are you today?
I'm doing so well today, Tim. Thanks so much for asking. Hope everyone out there is doing well. I think that what we have coming up, this conversation, a return guest, is going to be a welcome episode for people. I feel like it's been a little too long since we've had him on the show. I hold this person in such high esteem, and I know you do as well, Tim. But before we get to him, how are you?
I'm doing all right. Thanks a lot for asking. And yeah, today we're speaking with fellow podcaster and really friend in this industry, Eric Carter-Landin. And he does his own podcast called True Consequences that is mostly about New Mexico true crime. And you got to check that out at True Consequences, and there's a link in the show notes. But he also fights for justice for his brother, Jacob Landin. And that's what we're speaking about here today with Eric. There's been some ups and downs, and he's really angry. Actually, this is the very first thing he says, is he's very angry about where this pursuit for justice is now.
Yeah, I believe he even says that the gloves are off, and all of the developments that have happened over the course of the past several months has really brought him to the level of it's worth it now to get angry and show your anger and start fighting, which I completely respect him for.
Absolutely. There's a lot to this battle that he has taken on for justice for Jacob Landin, and you can find a Facebook group out there. There's also an Instagram page, but make sure to check out the links in the show notes to follow all of Eric's work and to follow his journey for justice for Jacob.
All right, we're going to break real quick for commercial, and we will be right back with our conversation with Eric Carter-Landin.
Welcome back to the podcast, Eric Carter-Landin. How are you tonight?
Oh man, it's good to see you guys. I'm pretty mad, but it's good to see you guys and be on your show again.
Wow. Okay. That took me off guard because not a lot of guests will respond with, I'm pretty mad.
Yeah.
But it's good to see you. It is good to see you too. I feel like we have a good rapport, and all of these conversations that we have are so few and far between. We need to do this more, is what I'm saying.
Agreed.
Even if you're mad.
Okay. Perfect. Works for me. I'm not mad at, just so everybody knows, I'm not mad at Tim and Lance at all.
It's just Lance you're mad at.
It's mostly Lance. Yeah.
Just kidding. Obviously, there's been some developments in your brother's case that you're here to discuss tonight. Before we get too deep into that, can you just refresh the audience, catch us up on the case and
Sure.
And what happened to your brother?
Yeah, so definitely to get the full story, you can go back and listen to the other episode that we did here on Crawl Space. But I also have an episode on my show where I talk to my mom, and it's pretty raw and pretty emotional. My brother Jacob Landin was 9 months old when he was killed, and he was killed by my mom's boyfriend at the time, who I haven't named yet, but anticipate that that's going to be coming soon. It was a case of child abuse, clear-cut child abuse. Unfortunately, in the 80s, we didn't have a lot of understanding to the level that we do now about things like domestic violence. Child abuse was kind of this like nebulous thing that happened in other places. And so I feel like there was a lot of opportunities that weren't taken advantage of to intervene in Jacob's case because of those factors and because of a number of other factors. But I've been fighting for justice for close to 37 years now with my mom for Jacob, trying to get his killer locked up. And people that haven't heard Jacob's story might be wondering, like, how did that happen? There's a lot to that, and I think we can kind of get into some of that as we go later into this conversation. But essentially, I used to say I didn't know if it was corruption or if it was negligence. I think I probably said that on your show. I've confirmed now that it is corruption. That is what has caused Jacob's case to not go anywhere. And I have confirmation directly from an investigator that was on the case in 1987. So a number of factors happened. Unfortunately, through all of this, I guess I should say fortunately, because of listeners, because of people who engaged and helped. A few years ago, I did a campaign for people to call and to email and to write the district attorney and ask him to reopen Jacob's case, because it had been like 35 years at that point, or 34 years at that point. And within 2 days, he turned it over to the attorney general. And that gave us a lot of hope. It really did. We got really excited about that. But we can go into kind of what happened if you want later. I don't know how much you want me to go into the case. Like, I don't want to retell the whole thing, but if you want me to go further in, I can.
Yeah, I think go in as much as you feel is relevant to where you're at now,
Yeah.
I think knowing more about the corruption angle might be important, because different people have different definitions of corruption and what might be perceived as oversight or cutting corners might be perceived as corruption to others. But I think it's a little bit more than that, right?
It is more than that. I wish it was something like that. I feel like I could maybe not understand that as much as where we are now. So it's important to know that the person that I believe is responsible for killing my brother, the person who's responsible for abusing me and my mom, wasn't prosecuted at the time for a number of reasons. I think the primary one was that he was friends with all of the cops. They played basketball every weekend. It was never something that I was comfortable to say, like, this is obviously a problem in the case, because I didn't really know. I was a kid when this happened. But I spoke to the person. So I guess I need to back up a little bit, and I apologize for being all over the place. My emotions have been a wreck lately. But to back it up just a little bit, when I asked for the case file from the state of New Mexico on my brother's case, I went through it. I went through every single page of it, and I found in there a little mention in one of the supplemental reports of a confession that was obtained by the suspect, by the police of the suspect. But there was no other detail beyond that. It was just one little sentence, probably like 5 words, and there's no recording. There's no documentation of this confession. It doesn't exist as far as Socorro County in New Mexico believes, or the state of New Mexico. And so that's always bothered me. That's always been a huge question in my mind with this case. Like, how do you obtain a confession from somebody who's accused of killing a baby, and then it's just magically gone? And when I ask that question of people I've talked to in government, I'm often given answers like, well, it's a really old case and these kinds of things happen all the time and evidence always goes missing, which I know is true to a certain extent, but like the flippant nature that they say that really bothers me. That has nothing to do with the corruption, but it's just something that really, really bothers me, because it's, for them, it's just like, oh, well, it just happens. But for my mom and I, like, this is our whole life. This is my whole life. I've been fighting for justice. I'm 43. I've been fighting for justice for almost 37 years. Like, there's nothing flippant about this for me. It's not cute. It's not fun. At any rate, I was on Mile Higher with Kendall Ray, and a former Albuquerque Police Department officer approached me after that and said that she wanted to help, that she knew a lot of people in New Mexico and she wanted to look into the case. And so I offered to pay her for her services as a PI. I'm glad I didn't, because she ghosted us. But before she ghosted us, she told me that she had been talking to the police that were involved in the investigation, trying to get an understanding of what was going on. And what she said she was going to do was put everything together and give it to the attorney general so that they could take that and prosecute. So she told me that she spoke with Patrick Apodaca, who was, I think, one of the main investigators in Jacob's case in Socorro. And he told her that he, first of all, did record the confession. He did document it, and he did have it signed. So good to know. He also said there's a part where the former chief of police was asked about the evidence missing, about the case, about what was going on in the police report. I'm jumping all over, and I'm sorry, guys, but like, we did have the case reinvestigated in the early 2000s by the cold case investigation unit of the state police. And so that's where this kind of part is coming from. That officer or detective, Christian, asked Chief Haley, or former Chief Haley, if he remembered the case, if he knew anything about it. He said he didn't. Patrick Apodaca calls BS on that. So there's no way that anybody would have forgotten this case, because there had never been a case like this in Socorro County. And it's important to know that there's only like 6,000 people in this town. Like, it's not a big town. Things don't happen like this all the time. So Patrick says that he knew from the beginning that it was going to be covered up, that the sheriff at the time had actually taken the suspect while state police were looking for him to arrest him, and was driving him around for hours so that he could evade arrest. So that's the first clue that he had. And then, of course, saying that he knew that evidence, or that recording and that confession, wasn't going to go anywhere because he heard people talking about it.
Okay, I first have to compliment you on your diligence not naming a name and always saying the suspect and the person in question, and being very selective about your verbiage when you're speaking about this person. So just well done on that part, because I don't know what I would do in your situation. I would have gotten myself into trouble a long time ago, I think. I want to back it up just a little bit.
Yeah.
You said that you were told that, and you said they said it in a flippant way, evidence always goes missing. Mm-hmm. What is your response to that in real time?
I usually just kind of shake my head. I don't usually say anything, because it's just so absurd to me that is acceptable. Like, if I, in my day job, just decided to get rid of records and I was flipping, I would be fired. Like,
right.
How?
And if like someone who you had a responsibility to with these records was like, what happened? And you're like, it just happens.
Yeah.
Your boss would be livid.
Yes.
You'd be gone.
Yes. 100%.
Yeah. It's really, like, it's infuriating.
It gets worse. Trust me.
That's pretty disturbing information that you've given us so far. So tell us more about the confession. What's the story there? This was recorded. Where is it?
Yeah, I wish I knew. I really do. I have no clue what happened to it. So I may have mentioned this before on your show. I don't remember if I did on the last episode, but there was a fire at the district attorney's office. I think it was like in 1991 or 1992. The whole building burned down, and it was a very old building, adobe building. So I guess just the inside burned. I don't know, but a lot of things were lost in that fire. Now, I feel like everything that I'm going to say today is going to make me sound like a conspiracy nut job. And so I apologize in advance for that. Tim and Lance know me. They know that I'm not that type of person. I'm I'm pretty pragmatic when it comes to a lot of things. And so it's going to sound fantastical. It's going to sound absurd, probably, to a lot of people. And I wish that it wasn't real. Like, I really do, but it is. So I'm not saying that the suspect had anything to do with the fire, but he did have the keys to every building in the county because he was a custodian for the county. So he had opportunity to do that, to make that happen. But I have no proof that is what happened. It's just an interesting fact to consider.
That does not sound like a conspiracy whatsoever, because you mentioned he had opportunity, and when you put all of the pieces together, there's motive too to light that fire. And of all the guests that we've had over almost a decade of doing this show, you've been one of the more like pragmatic and articulate guests that we've ever had, considering where you're coming from. And I think every time we speak, I'll always, Tim and I will text after and we're like, how is he doing this? Like, so you are not by any means considered in our view, like someone who would rush to conclusions or, rush to a judgment, or be somebody who would just throw out a conspiracy theory just for the sake of doing it. I mean, this is coming after a lot of work.
Yeah.
I would also point to your podcast, True Consequences, to have people hear your work on other cases and decide for themselves if they think you're conspiratorial. But I'm pretty sure they're going to agree. Now, you mentioned that you haven't named Jacob's killer yet, but you said yet. Is that something that's been weighing on your mind?
I'm planning next steps. My mom and I are working on what we're going to do now, because as we'll talk about, we received some news regarding the case that was not what we wanted to hear. And so I'm exploring all possibilities, all courses of action. I've already started exposing some of this stuff on social media and on my podcast, honestly. So I think that people can expect more information coming in the near future from me, from the show, and potentially from national media sources.
And if you don't mind, because definitely do want to get to that, but if you don't mind going back a little bit and talking about Jacob.
Yeah.
I know it was a time when, you were young. He was a baby. Can you just talk about him a little bit and familiarize the listeners who don't know?
Thank you for asking that, Lance. My mind is obviously in a million different directions today, so I appreciate you bringing me back to that, because I always try to start with that. Jacob was my miracle baby, my miracle brother. I was raised in a very religious home. My dad was an evangelist, and so I prayed for Jacob. I prayed for a little brother. And when I found out my mom was pregnant, it was the best day of my life at the time. I had learned how to ride my bike without training wheels, and I had fallen into a bush. My parents, as I was crying, told me that my mom was pregnant, and I completely forgot about the pain that I was in, and I started running around and screaming like a maniac and jumping up and down like any 5-year-old who really wanted a sibling would do. And when he was born, he was a giant. He was 10 pounds. My mom she was 5'1". She's probably like 4'10" now. But she was 5'1" at the time. So very, very big baby for her. He had such a huge personality for a baby. Like, my son had a big personality, but Jacob's was just to the nth degree. He was fearless. He used to we had this old swing, wind up swing, and he would, as it would swing forward, he would grab the front legs, and then as it went backwards, he would throw the whole thing back because he was gigantic. And so the first time he did it, everyone freaked out. And then we started pushing the swing against the wall so that he couldn't do it anymore. He got really mad about it. But he used to laugh. He thought he thought these things were hilarious. He loved to play Superman. He liked to pull all of the drawers out of the kitchen cabinets because it was the 80s and there was no childproofing. So there was cutlery falling all around him. And I remember I heard this massive noise one day, and I go into the kitchen and I'm like, "What are you doing?" And he just looks up at me and he laughs at me. And he laughed like Eddie Murphy. He did this like kind of thing that it was the weirdest laugh. I've never heard a baby laugh like that. He was everything, you know? He made our family. Like our family was complete with him. I can't help but get emotional.
Yeah, absolutely. Tell us about the recent statement that you and your family put out.
Yeah. So, like I said, we did a call and email campaign for the district attorney in Socorro County. I called it the 10 Days of Jacob. The DA lasted 2 days before he emailed me and asked me to stop it, which made me feel really good. He, at the same time, emailed the attorney general and copied me and said, I'm not able to handle this case. I need you to take this off my hands, which is really the only way the attorney general could have gotten involved in this case, because it's very strict jurisdictional rules. You know, the AG can't interfere unless they're completely corrupt and they can prove it. And, you know, then they have to step in for that reason. Otherwise, if everything seems to be above board, the DA would have to turn it over in order for them to have it. So I was very, very grateful for that. And that honestly gave me a lot of hope, which was not something that I've had for a long time. It felt pretty hopeless up until that point, honestly, because we'd asked multiple DAs. We even had that reinvestigation in the early 2000s. And in that as well, you know, the investigator thought that they should have charged him back then. There was no reason. They had all the evidence. They could have done it. They just refused to. So the attorney general takes it. We have a couple of meetings with them. I decided that I was going to stop talking about the case at the time because I wanted to give the investigators the space and the opportunity to do a thorough investigation without the media being all over it. So I stopped talking about Jacob's case. And then there was an election and there was a new attorney general. And I thought that it would be a good idea for me to interview both the candidates that were running, just not so much for the show, but more so that I could get to know them and start to talk to them and start to build that relationship with them. One was much more receptive in the conversation than the other. The other one was like half an hour late and then just really dismissive is probably the right way to say it. And so he actually is the one who won, which made me nervous. But I did know something about Raul Torres. I knew that he cares about being elected. He cares about his image. He cares about his polls. So whether I like him or not, I can work with that, right? Like I can use that to my advantage. I can make it politically unpopular for him to ignore me. So I just kind of stayed with status quo, but I started talking about the case again because I knew that that would hopefully put some pressure on them to do something. So we got a call in December asking us to go to the district attorney's office. And I will say that Hector Balderas was the attorney general before Raul. In that initial conversation with their office, he was there. He apologized to my mom and I on behalf of the state of New Mexico. He admitted that the state of New Mexico did not do what they were supposed to do at the time. And like I said, we felt pretty hopeful after that conversation. For this conversation, the fact that they wanted to meet in person also created some hope in us, because we felt like surely if they were planning to give us bad news, they would have just emailed us or, called us on the phone, not drag us into the office to have a conversation. Unfortunately, when we did meet with them on January 11th or 12th, one of those days, they said that they weren't going to prosecute Jacob's killer. And they said that it was because there wasn't enough evidence. And so at first I was understanding to a certain point, I think, knowing that the confession has been missing, knowing that probably a lot of the medical records are going to be hard to find, if not impossible. But my mom and I were sitting there and we just kind of unloaded on them. And I told them that I felt like New Mexico is complicit in any other abuses that this man perpetrated after Jacob died, because they refused to do anything. Knowing that that's not this Attorney General's office's responsibility or fault. Like, many of them were children when this happened. But first of all, Raul wasn't there, which I'm not saying that like I automatically deserve an audience with the Attorney General, but considering what's happened with this case and considering how screwed up it's been from the beginning, it would have been a nice effort to have been made on their part, in my opinion, especially if they're going to be delivering bad news to us. So the only reason I bring that up is because I think it really compares and contrasts the two different attorney generals that I've been dealing with. Like, there's a difference between the two of them. And I think that's all I'm going to say about that. Everybody else can make up their own minds.
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack here, and some of it is on like an emotional level, and some of it is more in the red tape and bureaucracy of the whole thing. Yeah. But I want to address one thing that's on an emotional level with you, is that you brought up the word hope a few times, whether it's like we were hopeful or we felt hopeless. And before we get into more of the, I guess, pen and paper like bureaucracy and that, how do you manage that with your family, with your mother? How do you manage that roller coaster of hope and hopelessness? And well, if it was bad news, they would have just emailed us. How does that all get managed when you're en route to meet with these people? And then how do you manage it when you realize, wow, that went in 180 degrees the other way?
So, for myself, I was trying really hard to not get excited about it. I was trying really hard to just keep myself centered and calm and a little bit detached from any outcome, because in my heart, I knew how devastated I would be if I got super excited about it and then found out that it wasn't what I thought it was going to be. But my mom's enthusiasm, and I'm not blaming her for this or anything like that, but her enthusiasm really caused me to get a little bit excited, to get my hopes up a little bit. And talking to people who also agreed, who've been in this position, people that are fighting for justice, who have said they wouldn't call you in for nothing. Like, they wouldn't ask you to come all the way. Like, I had to drive 75 miles to go pick my mom up, and then 70 miles up to Albuquerque and then 75 miles back, and then 5 miles back home again. So I did 250 miles that day. You know what I mean? Like, it wasn't just driving down the road. So it was hard to not say, like, and they knew that. So it was hard for me to not be like, oh, well, obviously this is going to be good. So I'm still unpacking the emotions around all of it. It's just like grieving all over again. I went through all, the denial and the anger and the bargaining and the depression. I'm kind of like in the depression phase right now. But I'm going to therapy, trying to take care of myself as much as I can. My mom and I, we call each other when things get hard, and we listen to each other, and we lean on each other, because nobody else understands. Like, if I didn't have her, I don't know that I would be able to do this.
You also kind of gave a pause when you said that you stopped talking about it for a while. Is that something that you look back on and you're thinking, had I continued talking, it would be different? Because personally thinking, I don't think a lot of things would be different when you're dealing with the forces that you're dealing with. It doesn't matter how much you talk about it. It could be completely different at this point, meaning you could have been silenced a long time ago. I'm just curious what your thoughts are. You don't regret not talking about it, right? For a little bit?
No, I don't. I don't regret it. I think what I regret is the lost momentum, probably, more than the decision to not talk about it.
Right, but even then, like, you don't even know if that would have been momentum. It might have been a significant shift where you're completely stonewalled.
Yeah. It's true. It's really, like, I think that's something that people don't really think about when they're consuming true crime content. Like, there's so much more to the story beyond the murder, especially in Jacob's case. Like, it's volumes and volumes more beyond that. And so, like, people get to turn their show on and listen to it and then turn it off. We don't get that luxury. It's always on for us. So, yeah, it's always a risk. You never know what strategy is going to work, what strategy isn't going to work, what strategy is just not going to have any effect whatsoever. Like, it's like the worst game of chess that you could play.
And you mentioned that the reason they're not going to press charges or pursue charges is because they felt they didn't have enough evidence.
Yeah.
And we also spoke about this confession recording that apparently isn't able to be found, but it was a recording. I guess my question is about like confirmation. Like, how do you know that? And you mentioned corruption and confirmation. Is this what you meant, or part of what you meant?
Well, I think talking to Patrick Apodaca, the investigator that was involved in the case, really confirmed a lot of my suspicions, at least on an anecdotal level. I don't know that, aside from, here's the thing, I think, like, I can't prove right now that everything Patrick is saying is true, right? But given all the circumstances and given everything that I know about the case, it's the most logical conclusion to come to in this case, in my opinion. But I've never been able to feel comfortable to say that until I heard it from that police officer's mouth, if that makes any sense. He confirmed what I've always suspected, but I never wanted to fully say it until I knew for a fact, because I wasn't there. I don't know what happened. It could have been negligence, but when you have somebody who took the actual confession telling you that he knew they were going to cover it up, it's pretty compelling to me.
And this was something that PI that you said ghosted you was sort of facilitating?
Yeah, she started the conversation. And then as soon as that came out, she stopped talking to me.
Oh, is this like related, do you think? Like, it wasn't like a PI who took the money and said, my job here is done? Or
we didn't pay her to do anything. Like
so this person didn't even take money.
She was refusing to be paid, and promising that she was going to do all this stuff, but she never did. And who knows what happened? Like maybe she had something happen in her life. I don't know. I'm not going to cast any, suspicions on her because I don't have any reason to, but it is weird that she did disappear after all that happened. But yeah, I guess that's the confirmation that I was talking about.
And I just want to be clear for people listening, the PI didn't take money. You don't have contact with this person anymore. Who is, or what was the last person, or I guess department? What was the last communication she had with someone other than you?
As far as I know, it was just with Patrick Apodaca. She claimed that she went to the hospital to try to get records there, and had my mom sign a form for that, but we never heard back whether she obtained those records or not.
That's odd.
I know. Like I said, it's going to sound crazy, right? Like all of this is weird. I wish I was making it up. I really do.
Yeah. Well, where do you go from here? What's your next move?
So I don't want to give away too much of what we're planning, but you can expect that I'm going to continue talking about this. You can expect that I'm probably going to be reaching out to national media sources, because it's now my mission to, first of all, make sure that this person cannot hurt anybody ever again. I'm going to hire an actual PI, somebody who doesn't live in New Mexico, somebody who has to fly in and doesn't know anything about what's going on here. And if that makes me paranoid, then whatever, I don't care. But that's what we're doing. We're probably going to hire a civil attorney as well to explore potential civil litigation, if that's a possibility. It may not be, but I'd like to at least explore that option. And I'm going to shine a light on all of the problems here in New Mexico. And I really hope that the Attorney General enjoyed his job while he had it.
That's a great line that I feel like it should end the episode, but there's too much conversation that needs to happen right now.
Yeah.
So if you have something just as powerful for the actual end of the episode, feel free to use it.
Well, you can take it out of here, and then I can use that at the end if you want.
Yeah, just plug it in at the end.
Yeah.
You had said previously, and then you just said now you want to make sure that the suspect does not hurt anybody else, doesn't have the opportunity to hurt anybody else. And you said previously other abuses that this person might have perpetrated. Is there some evidence of other abuses aside from yourself, your mom, and Jacob that you know of?
There's very strong suspicions, and we have a number of reasons for having those suspicions that I'm not really comfortable elaborating on right now. But I think that the possibility of him changing his behavior, knowing the type of psychology or the type of behavior that this person exhibits, he's classic, right? He's the gregarious, happy, funny, friendly guy, gets along with everybody. Everybody loves him. And then behind closed doors, it's like the Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde situation where he becomes a complete monster. So in my mind, and knowing what I know about those types of people, they don't get better on their own. They don't just stop what they're doing. They continue to be predatory until they physically can't normally. So the chance of him hurting other people is very high. And so even if the Attorney General or the state of New Mexico refuses to bring charges on this particular case, it's not about vengeance for me and my mom. It's about making sure that he can't hurt anybody else. And he's had 37 years to do that. So when we hire a private investigator, if they uncover evidence of crimes that have been committed beyond what happened with Jacob and my family, and that happens to get turned over to police, fine. I don't care. It's not about having to go to trial for Jacob. It's about the fact that this man is a danger to anybody who's around him. And so when I say things like I haven't said his name yet, it's because that's something I'm very strongly considering so that people can protect themselves from this person.
And is he still local to New Mexico?
So actually we found out that my mom confronted him in Walmart, and because he had been kind of following her around the store. And so she just went up to him and said, you're nothing but a fucking baby murderer, as loud as she could. And he took off. So good for my mom. Proud of her for that. The other thing that happened is I did publicly announce that the case had been reopened. And shortly after that, and after that encounter with my mom, he inherited his parents' home when they died, and that was boarded up, and he has not been seen. So some of his family have shared that they don't know where he is. I don't know that all of them don't know where he is, but some of them don't know where he is. I don't know if he's hiding or what's happening, but it's interesting. It's an interesting thing to know.
Boarded up, like houses
like no
windows, longer being occupied.
Yeah. No windows, no doors, just everything's nailed shut.
Man, I gotta say, like, at some point we have to have you and your mom on, because you've told us stories about your mother several times, and for her to do that in Walmart is pretty badass and pretty admirable. And you use the term vengeance, like this isn't something that is, vengeance for us, but there's something there, right? Like there has to be some retribution. I mean, when you say vengeance, I personally think like I'm fine with vengeance for something like this, but there has to be some sort of retribution.
I can be a vindictive person. I can. It's just who I am sometimes. In this situation, it's not about me anymore. And it is because, yes, I'm a co-victim. Okay, I get that. But I'm okay now. I'm safe. My mom is safe now. It terrifies me to think about somebody else falling into his hands. That's my priority. Of course, I want him to be held accountable for what he did. Of course I do. But if that's not the avenue that's going to get the result that I want, which is for him to not be able to hurt anybody else, then whatever other avenue it's going to take, like, let's do that one. I don't care. I guess that was my point, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. And one of the other things I wrote down here was identifying the behavior of people who are like this person. And that's something that you can carry through by saying, here are the warning signs that I saw. Mm-hmm. And if you know anybody in your life who is exhibiting these similar warning signs that I saw, that needs to be a red flag. What are some of those warning signs that you look back on now and you say, that was so clearly a dangerous person, I just didn't know because I was so young?
Yeah. I think the first thing is disarming. That's usually the first thing that somebody that is trying to be predatory with another person will do. And it comes in a number of ways. The way that that this person chose to disarm my mom and I was with love bombing, which, if you don't know what that is, it's when somebody that you maybe kind of know or barely know starts to shower you with attention and affection out of nowhere with no apparent cause. So much so that it feels uncomfortable. But I think human nature is just to kind of be like, well, this person's really nice. So maybe I'm just being too critical. Maybe I'm just overthinking this. And typically the people that they're going to prey on are people who are vulnerable, right? So my mom at the time had just separated from her husband that she married when she was 17 years old, that she has 2 kids with. She had 4 kids with, but one died at birth and one was miscarried. But she had just left her husband. She had just left Texas with her kids without a job, having to move back in with her parents, right? So she was the perfect victim. They knew each other. They went to school together. He was my dad's best friend. So completely disarmed all of us. He showered me with attention, which was something I didn't get from my dad. My dad was very rarely present in my life. If I wanted to eat candy for dinner, I was allowed to eat candy for dinner. So it was just a way to make us feel like everything was okay when honestly it was a trap.
I remember the first time that we had spoke, you used the term love bombing as well, and I'd never heard that, and I looked it up, and I was absolutely blown away by that and recognized it in the relationships with some of my partner and I, like mutual friends that we have that went through abuse and describe the same thing. So I can't even like emphasize how important that is, because you just said like it's a vulnerable situation that they're taking advantage of.
That should be your first clue that something's wrong, honestly. Like, and I'm not saying that people should be leery of anybody who's nice to them. Like, it's a completely different level. It's where almost to the point where they're basically saying that they love you and you've only been seeing each other for like a few nights. You know, like I'm starting to feel like I'm falling for you and my world is changed because like 3 days into the relationship, like, what are you talking about? Those things should give people pause. But if you get through that and you don't recognize it and you don't leave at that point, there are other things to look for, right? Are you being isolated from your support network? Is your money being controlled? Is your communication being controlled? Is where you need to be and when you need to be there and how you need to be in those places being controlled? Are the things that you're allowed to say controlled? Coercive control is a huge part of this. And once they've demeaned you and beat you down and controlled you enough, that's when they start to really amp things up. So it's kind of an escalation of behavior that gets progressively worse. So the sooner you recognize it and the sooner you get out, the better off you're going to be, honestly.
Well, that's very informative stuff. Thank you for sharing that. You mentioned Twitter recently, I think before we started rolling, and there was a tweet that you put out today as we record this on January 29th, 2024, and it sort of called out the New Mexico DOJ and the Socorro PD. Can you tell us a little bit about this tweet?
Okay, well, first of all, I do have to tell you that this is not even a joke, and I wish it was. So the New Mexico Attorney General, the day before they pulled us into their office, rebranded their office as the New Mexico Department of Justice. So if you look a couple of replies below that, you'll see that I actually had my friend Whitney from Navigating Advocacy redo their logo. And now it says the New Mexico Department of Injustice, which I'm probably going to sell as merchandise and donate to whoever's running against Raul Torres.
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program.
I am, like I said at the beginning of this episode, I'm pissed. I'm pissed off. It's ridiculous that we've had to fight so hard for something that should have been done right in the first place. Like, if they would have done their job, I wouldn't have been molested. My mom wouldn't have been beat up. So many horrible things wouldn't have happened if they would have just done their jobs in 1987. If they would have put their friendship aside and done the right thing. Because how is it okay not only to kill a baby? That's bad. That's the worst thing ever. I'm not minimizing that, but on top of that, to just be like, it's cool. Just let this guy hang out and be free. No big deal. And so I've played the game for the last 3 years, 37 years, but really for the last 3 years, I've tried to play nice. I've tried to do the respectful thing, and I've tried to be quiet about a lot of the things that have bothered me, because it didn't matter to me as long as the case was progressing. So now that we're here, like, the gloves are off, man. Like, I'm done. I'm not playing nice anymore. I'm not sugarcoating anything. I'm going to tell it exactly like it is. I'm going to shine a spotlight on the problems here, because we can't hope to fix any of this. Like, I'm not the only person. My family, we're not the only ones that are dealing with this. This is happening all the time in New Mexico. And CYFD, the Child, Youth, and Families Department, is completely useless. And it's not the social workers' fault. It isn't. It is the state government's fault, because they're unwilling to do the things that are necessary to fix it. It is just like probably all other child protective services agencies in the country, understaffed, overworked, underfunded, all of those things. But at some point, we've got to stop making excuses, and we got to just shut up and do the work that it's going to take to fix it. Because every time a kid dies in New Mexico, people just throw up their hands and they're like, oh, wow, this always happens, but I guess nothing's going to change. And I'm sick of it. So it's my mission now. I'm going to call it out. I'm going to make it unpopular for our elected officials to ignore this problem, as they've continued to do for decades. Enough is enough. I've tried to do it the nice way. I've tried to follow the bureaucracy. They don't give a shit. And so now, if you lose your job and you're an elected official because I'm spouting off at the mouth, good. You should be ashamed of yourself.
Yeah, well said. And the fact that, like, excuses are used, like they're understaffed and underfunded. But then you look at another side of an argument where they're talking about the infrastructure of your roads, and they justify billions of dollars into infrastructure, and then with the same, in the same news conference, they talk about the importance of empowering youth and the future of this country, and then they don't have the proper systems in place to protect children because they're understaffed and underfunded. But all of different monies go to different things that don't go to what the future is that they're talking about. So it's a giant piece of hypocrisy.
Huge. And don't be just like, what do I want to say? I don't even know. I'm like so mad right now. I don't even know what I was going to say, but essentially, like, don't mistake those excuses. Like, the people that write the budgets are the ones making the excuses.
Right.
They're blaming this nebulous problem that they are involved in creating.
Right. And it's layers upon layers of hypocrisy, and it's been that way for generations. So people are like, I guess that's what it is. Mm-hmm. I guess that's where the priorities are. So good on you for just being like, I'm pissed and I'm going to try to change it. You're directly involved in it. You have a significant hand in the game. So good on you for that. Fuck them. Like, why that you're putting them in office, it's our tax dollars,
right?
Like, that's your job,
right? And you're failing
and you're making excuses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's that simple. It really is.
Yeah. And we all look at our jobs too, and we're like, if I ever was so negligent at my job, Tim would fire me. That was a terrible joke. Sorry.
It was.
But if we were all so if we all just dropped the ball so many times on the direct purpose of our jobs, so many times, people in the position to fire those people would just have no problem doing it.
Exactly. Which is why I have no problem calling them out.
Yeah.
Somebody
why
has
not?
to. Yeah.
What? Really? What are they going to do?
Yeah.
Hopefully they'll change.
Well, they haven't done anything yet, so I would be surprised if they did anything now, honestly. Like, I'm convinced that the case was not investigated. I am. And like I started kind of going there. I did think that I felt like I was giving them the benefit of the doubt in that meeting. But a couple of things happened upon reflection that bothered me. The first one was when they said, well, after they kind of gave me the evidence always disappears speech, which I, of course, rolled my eyes to and said it shouldn't. Then they said, well, there was a fire in the 90s at the DA's office. And I said, yeah. And then I asked, well, that he was a custodian for the county and had the keys to every building, right? And they said, what? They were shocked. Shocked. I gave them my file. My mom's file, honestly. It had his pay stubs in there. Like, they didn't even have to dig for that. It was there.
So they had no idea.
No clue.
Nothing was done, right? I mean, that just shows you there's no effort put forth here.
They've certainly underestimated me and my mom. But I don't think that they'll do that again.
As we wrap up, I would love to know about your family. You said you had a son.
Yeah. I have a son. He's 18 years old. I also have a husband. Yeah. Yeah. He's 18. I have a husband. I have a Chihuahua Pug Beagle mix. He's basically a cat that barks and poops outside.
A Chihuahua Pug Beagle mix. What's the temperament like on an animal like that?
He's basically a cat. He just lays in the sun all day. And
okay.
Yeah, he's not yappy. He's just pretty lazy, mostly. Yeah, he's like Garfield, kind of.
Loves lasagna.
Loves lasagna.
Nice. What do you tell your son about what you're working on here? What do you tell him about Jacob?
Oh, he knows the whole story. As I started this process of advocating for justice publicly, I really wanted to just give him the information before that happened so that he wouldn't stumble upon it and find it on his own. He already knew that my brother was killed and he already knew some of it, but he didn't know the whole story. And so I felt it was important. It's family history, as sad and terrible as it is. It's something important to know. It's also, I think, important for him to know what drives me and what keeps me going and what lights a fire under my ass. And so I told him everything, and he was obviously upset by it, and he gave me a big hug and he was crying. But he supports my mom and I, and he cheers us on, and he's there to hug us whenever things go wrong. And he's a great kid, great man now, I guess I should say.
Wow. Well, this has been another great conversation, Eric. Is there anything else you'd like to say here before we wrap up for tonight?
I just want to thank both of you for sharing your platform with me, not just tonight, but also when I needed it for Jacob's case. It really means a lot to me. I want to thank your listeners for their engagement and caring about justice for Jacob. And if it wasn't for creators like you, for listeners like you who are listening right now, we wouldn't have gotten the case where it is without you. And so we are forever grateful to all of you for your part in this. We'll never be able to thank you enough or repay you for what you've done for us. Thank you.